Look, I'm just trying to open up some wider horror-based conversations here. There are plenty of awesome horror movies out there, but it feels as though only a select few get to stay in the spotlight for any significant amount of time. So let's bring back some underrated classics. Let's force some newer gems into the public eye. And most of all, let's talk some more about horror movies. This is the top 5 scariest horror movies nobody talks about, part 5. Let's go. Coming in at number 5, we've got Motel Hell. Of all the ridiculous 80s horror movies out there, Motel Hell is surprisingly underserved. Like, I'm pretty sure the entire thing is up on YouTube somewhere, Spanish subtitles and all, so there's no excuse not to have watched it at this point. Plus, it's been out for like 40 years now, 41, now that it's 2021. No love lost though, especially as it did get some attention in the excellent 80s horror doc In Search of Darkness. It just never really reached the same level of iconography as a lot of other 80s horror gems. Can't imagine why not though. It's got a little bit of everything. Slaughterhouse vibes, cannibalism, live burials, nasty pig masks, and more. Plus, it's an early example of something everyone wants to see in a horror movie: chainsaw fights. If you have 2 chainsaws locked into each other throwing sparks, your movie's already elevated, no questions asked. But the beauty of Motel Hell is that the chainsaw fight doesn't even really need to be there to make it a fun and freaky flick. It makes it a better fun and freaky flick, but it could exist without the chainsaw fight and still be very good. The story goes like this. Siblings Vincent and Ida run a farm/motel out in the boonies. They've lovingly named their little home away from home Motel Hello, but the neon O is having some issues. Classic. Of course, if you were to see a motel literally called Motel Hell, you'd probably avoid it. But back in the 80s, nobody knew any better. So the folks who come to this bed and breakfast become the breakfast. Vincent sets traps on nearby roads, and whenever there's an accident, he takes the injured motorists and buries them in his garden. He leaves their heads above ground though, so they can grow big and strong like crops, and cuts their vocal cords so they can't call for help. The rest is a bunch of disembodied heads wriggling around and making some nightmarish noises. If that concept alone isn't scary enough to give you the heebie-jeebies on a whole new level, just know that there's a whole lot more going on in this strange crop-creating motel. The local sheriff is the 3rd Motel Hell sibling, but he doesn't know about the gnarly dealings of his cannibal brethren, so of course there's some friction between the trio when more is revealed. For conjuring up some truly horrific imagery and presenting audiences with a bevy of colorful characters, Motel Hell should be held up as an early 80s classic. Unfortunately, it's been eclipsed by all of the more iconic slashers that followed soon after, so give it a watch and enjoy the mayhem. Coming in at number 4, we've got Low. Low budget, low problem. Hopefully you can forgive me for that one. But seriously, that's the best way to describe this tragic and beautiful psychological horror comedy. It's small in scale, with only a few characters interacting over the entire course of the movie, and most of the action happening through flashbacks. But it tells a fascinating story of love and loss, and demons. One location, but it never feels visually boring or stagnant. In fact, a lot of folks say that it feels sort of like a stage play adapted for the big screen, or the small streaming screen. But it released in 2009, so Netflix hadn't quite dominated the entertainment sphere yet. Low is about a man named Justin whose girlfriend, April, is trapped in hell. Yikes. Tough break, buddy. However, Justin has a book on demon summoning, so he cracks it open and decides to summon the demon Low. Low shows up and lets Justin know that it's hopeless to try to find his girlfriend, but Justin doesn't want to give up. Because of the control allotted to him by summoning Low, he demands that Low head back down there and look harder, damn it. As Low bounces back and forth between Earth and Hell, Justin experiences many flashbacks involving different stages of he and April's relationship. A lot of these reveal that April probably was a demon after all, but our boy Justin refuses to accept this. Faust is woven in, and all sorts of potential deals with the devil are considered. Should Justin accept that his love is stuck in hell and move on, living his life alone? Or would dying for that love be a better end to his story? All of this is explored through surprisingly funny dialogue. Dry wit is the name of the game here. And the demons that we end up meeting are grotesque and also goofy and a whole lot of fun. It sort of plays out like a rom-com, but one narrated and commented upon by bloody, slimy, pale, goblin-esque versions of Statler and Waldorf. That comparison to the balcony-dwelling Muppets is especially relevant because Low plays out like a stage play. See, it's all coming together. If a Faustian tale full of dry humor and lovable monsters sounds like your thing, check out Low. Lots to pick apart here. Coming in at number 3, we've got Ghost Team. Speaking of horror comedies that are more than they appear, here is Ghost Team, the tale of a ragtag group of ghost hunters and their adventure that goes very, very sideways. There's a lot going on here. First, we meet the BFF roomie duo, Lewis and Stan. They both watch the ever-popular ghost hunting TV show Ghost Getters, inspiring Lewis to put together a little demo video. But if he's gonna shake up his life and make it as a paranormal investigator, he's gotta get a team and some equipment. So the pals round up a few more goofballs and head out to an abandoned building that people have been warned away from. Up until this point, the movie is pretty much a comedy. It's a slacker story full of small-town nobodies who want to be somebodies. Everyone's lacking in the skills they need to be successful, but they do their best anyways. Lots of big personalities clashing and goofy, awkward interactions. But once these doofuses make it to the supposedly haunted house, it turns into a quasi-found footage flick. They all set up their cameras and ghost hunting equipment and things take a turn. It gets spooky. There are some really cool moments woven in here with people disappearing and figures appearing in the background. Ghost Team makes sure not to focus too much on the creepy happenings in the periphery. If you're paying attention, you'll get sufficiently spooked, all while being led from room to room by a group of less than experienced ghost hunters. It has a weird payoff, but definitely keeps the scares and twists coming. Plus, John Heder and Justin Long are in it. This is one to watch with your less horror-inclined friends, but there's still lots to discuss in terms of how they set up the scares and defy expectations. Coming in at number 2, we've got Frailty. So you want to be a serial killer guided by the steady hand of God? Boy, do I have a movie for you. Featuring Matthew McConaughey and Bill Paxton. And Paxton's also in the director's chair. Sounds like a blast, right? This is a bit of a mind bender with 2 timelines going at the same time. We've got Fenton, the supposed son of a serial killer, coming to the police as an adult and telling them all he knows about what his dad and brother supposedly did. But then it periodically flips back in time to when Fenton was a boy and he and his brother Adam helped their father commit all sorts of murder. Their papa claimed that God was giving him visions and sending him on holy missions to kill demons who have taken human form. Anytime he touches someone, he claims to be able to see something that lets him know if they're human or not, and if they fail the test, it's time to meet the axe. This is one messed up movie. This man is deluded beyond belief and seemingly passes these beliefs on to his young sons. But only one can be his true successor, and it's really hard to figure out who the chosen one is. Subdued in its execution but lastingly creepy, Frailty will stick with you long after you watch it. And of course, discussions on who the real killer was and if anyone actually had any real visions make for some very interesting discourse. And finally at number 1, we've got Tigers Are Not Afraid. When this first popped up on Shudder, I remember they did quite a bit of advertising for it. It was a festival darling, a daring international indie flick with incredible cinematography and child actors who could really truly act. But I haven't heard anyone talking about it since. In an unnamed Mexican city ravaged by the ongoing drug war, a group of young children are forced to survive on their own. With parents, relatives, and friends killed, they need to grow up quickly if they want to continue living. Estrella, a young girl still in school, is given 3 pieces of chalk by her teacher during a prolonged bout of gunfire near their classroom. Each one represents one wish, and when Estrella discovers that her mother's missing, she wishes for her to come back. Her mother returns, but as a terrifying ghost, one that will lead her through the streets of the city on a bloody quest for revenge. The dead want her to bring the crime boss to them, and after she meets up with some other orphans, they start to take steps towards getting back at the cartel. iPhones full of incriminating evidence are stolen, minor members are killed by different wishes, and deals with criminals are struck up. Tigers Are Not Afraid paints a horrifying picture of a world torn apart by violence and crime, and how the children caught up in it are forced to make sense of it in any way they can. It plays out like a gruesome fairy tale full of costly magic and unforeseen consequences. The ghosts that stalk the night are hideous and haunting too. If it sounds like the movie is just dark and not exactly scary, think again. Although it deals with a lot of themes that are not often explored in horror, some moments are breathtakingly horrifying. So get those motor mouths running and start chatting about these flicks. I promise there is plenty to discuss and lots to uncover. So, what'd you think of the list? Have you seen any of these? What are some movies that you wish got more love? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more aerated ones from the top 5 newest SCP Monsters 2021 Part 2. Glenn Smith says, I just want to clarify, I am not the Star Eater, it is just a coincidence. That's just what an eternal being would want us to think. Single Dad says, I make up impromptu SCP-style stories to tell my 12-year-old nephew when he visits. He refers to them as scary uncle stories. I should start writing them down. Scary uncle stories, eh? S-U-S? Sounds kind of sus. Spiral Down says, some of these SCPs are so entwined in quantum physics, who's to say it isn't happening in a bubble double universe? Good question. I guess we'll never know. Safarst86 says he looks like a 90s Winter Olympian. That's living the dream. And Creator's Legacy says the YouTuber SCP-800000000000000 Dr. Bob. Like the store brand Dr. Pepper. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm going to sketch on the Autobahn. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Unfortunately, it's been eclipsed by all of the more iconic slasher icons. Ooh, I said icons twice. All the while being led, no. Man, what did I write today? Their papa claimed that God was giving him visions and that sending him on holy missions, whoop. Their papa claimed that God was giving him 5 newest SCP Monsters 2020, part 2 is 2021. Look, we're on part 6. I'm not exactly sure what else to say during the intro at this point, but I'm sure you're all here for one reason and one reason only. You like my posters. But to ensure that I cover all my bases, we're gonna talk about some underappreciated horror. That's right, it's time for the top 5 scariest horror movies nobody talks about, part 6. Let's get to it. Coming in at number 5, we've got Summer of '84. This movie is dark, like dark. And the craziest part is that it makes you believe that it isn't for most of the runtime. It's the classic tale of some young gaffers with overly active imaginations trying to dig up some dirt on one of their neighbors. And of course they find out in the end that their suspicions were misplaced and have a big pizza party to apologize, right? Wrong. I don't want to spoil too much here, but holy smokes is the reveal in this movie nuts. Actually, it's beyond nuts, because after revealing the horror that was so well hidden for most of the runtime, they take it even further. Pulling the mask off the Scooby-Doo villain will not stop them this time. Mask off means this person has nothing left to lose and therefore will go even harder as a murderous villain. It is terrifying. And for a movie that plays with your expectations so expertly, it gets less praise than I think it should. Like, the reason I saw it in the first place was because I saw it on the shelf at the video store near my house and it had a cool cover. I hadn't read anything about it, hadn't heard anyone singing its praises, so if you're hearing about this movie for the first time, this is your sign to go and see it. I just think about all the parallels they draw between the opening and closing scenes and how depressing that shot is in context. Absolutely wild. It takes all the tropes you would expect from a fun, uplifting coming-of-age movie and twists the knife right in the belly. Right down to the annoyingly likable cast of idiot youth pulled right from the Goonies, except this time, the stakes are appallingly real. I'd like to say more, but like I already mentioned, I feel like I spoiled too much already, so grab a bag of M&Ms, maybe a can of Tab, and revel in the 80s nostalgia before they sweep your legs out from under you and make you feel ill. Isn't that why we all watch horror in the first place? At number 4, we've got WITCHBOARD. There is a quality to this movie that I just can't pin down, but it is just extremely watchable. One might think that a cheesy 80s demon summoning movie about a Ouija board wouldn't be captivating, but WITCHBOARD proves that hypothesis wrong. After a house party turns sour, a particularly pretentious guest whips out the Ouija board and proves that he's got a connection with a little boy on the other side. Following an argument with an extremely drunk rival, he leaves in a huff, forgetting to bring the board with him, which inspires the rival's girlfriend to use the board herself, accidentally summoning a much more malevolent presence. A bit contrived, sure, but the 80s was a different time. It manages to pack a bunch of over-the-top set-piece kills into its runtime though, and ends up being a whole lot of fun. The scene down by the lake is an all-timer, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get over the penultimate scene with the showdown with the evil spirit. Usually guns don't do much against the paranormal, but hey, you never know. Coming in at number 3, we've got Cabin by the Lake. Movies about making movies? What could be better? Well, what about a horror movie about a horror writer who does all of his research himself? You got it, he kills real people using insane methods in order to see how they react, and then uses that information while writing his scripts. Holy smokes. Very meta, very goofy, and a whole lot of fun. This is exactly the kind of movie that needs to be made for TV, which it was. Never too serious, featuring an idea that might not be quite strong enough for a theatrical feature, but with enough going for it to keep audiences engaged. This kind of low budget, like low risk movie just is so much fun when people make it right. Plus, having a garden of dead bodies at the bottom of a lake is a pretty fun idea, especially when he goes back to check on them every once in a while. I don't know, this movie probably shouldn't be considered all that good, but it's freaky enough to have a relatively lasting effect, plus it is the perfect window into the early 2000s. If you ever wanted to remember all of the insane fashion choices of folks back then, this is the way to see it. It's definitely made in the wake of Scream, which honestly is a fascinating era to investigate if you're interested in horror history. The postmodern, self-aware horror comedies that got churned out after Wes Craven's massive success are just so gosh darn interesting, even if they're ripping off a largely better movie. Don't go in expecting a masterpiece and you'll have a blast with this one. Coming in at number 2, we've got Whack It. Remember kids, summoning demons is serious business. You can't take that shit back once it's done, so think nice and hard before making a deal with the devil. And if you don't take me too seriously, then go watch Whack It and see exactly why that kind of extra precaution is worthwhile. In this Canadian creep fest, we meet Leah, a high schooler obsessed with the paranormal. I'm sure many can relate. However, Leah takes it a little too far. Instead of becoming a big horror movie nerd or spending her nights reading creepypasta, she decides she's gonna actually summon a demon because she's mad at her mom. We've all been there, right? Usually you go and scream into a pillow or sneak out and hang out with the kids she warned you away from. This whole summoning a deadly demon thing seems like a little much, but that's what Leah does, and wouldn't you know it, she and her mother soon reconcile after, leaving Leah a little bit conflicted about her ritual. So now she's got to live her life constantly afraid of when a crazy demon is going to show up, and this plays out very well throughout the movie as plenty of unexpected stuff happens. Leah wakes up in places she doesn't recognize, her friends start acting weird. She gets warned that the demon she summoned is able to shapeshift, meaning that she can't trust anyone. It leans into the creepiness of the situation more than anything else, making for a wonderfully atmospheric horror experience. As Leah tries to get rid of the demon through a few different methods, things get worse, and that feeling of unplaceable dread rises further and further. All set to some lovely metal tunes, too. So if you like your horror tense and creepy, Whack It is right up your alley. Oh, and Andrea from The Walking Dead is in it. But of course, it's from Canada, so folks are less inclined to talk about it. Story of my life, right? Finally, at number 1, we've got Spring. Here's something you don't hear about too often, a romantic horror movie. Horror comedy is super successful, so you gotta wonder why other famous genres don't get included as often. There have been a few decent horror westerns that make it pretty big, but horror romance seems to occupy a much less public space. Let me know if you know of any other horror romances in the comments. I wanna know about more. Back to the movie though, this is a sneaky little number. After a string of bad luck and tragedy, young lad Evan travels to Italy to clear his mind. He meets a young woman named Louise and takes a job on a nearby farm in order to stick around and try his luck with her. Probably a bad call though, especially when on vacation to relax, but hey. It ends up working out for him and Louise ends up sleeping with him, but something's wrong. And now Evan sees horrifying monsters wherever he goes, so what the hell's going on? Well, you might have guessed it, Louise is actually an immortal mutant monster. She's been alive for centuries and has to look for mates in order to stay alive. Now, in a lot of horror movies, this would become a fight for Evan's life as she tries to kill and silence him or maybe consume him like a Black Widow, but that is not the case in Spring. Love is part of the equation and Evan wants to know if they have a deeper connection, so he sticks around even longer, equal parts fascinated and freaked out by Louise's monstrous transformations and tendency to murder random things. Firing on all cylinders, Spring gives us body humor, coming of age, romance, Lovecraft, and more. It is a truly wild mix of genres, and there aren't many movies that can claim to tick as many boxes. Give it a whirl. Who says horror movies have to be well known? Well, actually, you know what? That's kind of what they're known for, is not being always well known. But folks would be more consistently scared if they dug a little deeper before landing on something to watch. So what'd you think of the list? Any of these seem extra spooky? Have you seen any? What's a horror movie you wish got more love? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more comical ones from the top 5 Shudder horror movies worth watching. Beezer says, Shudder is one of my favorite streaming services. You and me both. There is nothing quite like it. Larry Johnson says, In Huos. Okay, upon further investigation, you're Canadian. Geez, Larry, what gave it away? Was it my going oot in a boot in my canoe, or is my everlasting love of hockey seal the deal? Justin Compton says, so are we going to discuss the Nick Cage Five Nights at Freddy's movie? Oh, all in due time, my friend. All in due time. Stinkabell says, anything for Jackson slaps. And it is directed by the guy who's done like a million Christmas rom-coms based on Harlequin novels. Epsilon Zero says, fun fact, Host is just as long as a Zoom call time limit, and hot damn does it ever make use of that time. P.S. Anyone interested in SCPs, for the love of all things holy / blasphemic / superficial, play Control. Going back to the Zoom call bit, all of the credits are in the form of Zoom icons, etc. So that's just a really fun movie overall. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go brew some coffee with Red Bull instead of water and then head down to the local library. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Who says horror movies have to be well known? Well, excuse me. But folks who would be more consistently scared if they nope. That's my Canadian accent. I don't know if that that works. Sorry, I've got some weird going on in my mouth. And all the credits are in the form of Zoom icons too, so that's a pretty fun movie. I feel like I didn't sell that one. Hold on. You would think that eventually there wouldn't be any more horror movies getting less love than they should, but the thing is, there are always going to be movies that don't get the praise they deserve, and there's always going to be more of them than we can count. That is, until all of our media gets relegated to content and siphoned into our Neuralink devices so we never have to experience reality again. But until that bleak dystopian moment, let's talk about the top 5 scary horror movies nobody talks about, part 7. Forgot how to count for a second. Coming in at number 5, we've got REPO, the genetic opera. Often cited as the grossest musical of all time, REPO holds a special place in the hearts of a whole lot of camp fans. It's been compared to Rocky Horror and really not a whole lot else, but that makes sense considering the subject matter, tone, and execution of this absolutely wild, intestine-filled rock opera. In the not-so-distant future, organ failure has become the predominant epidemic. Folks don't have a cure for this general degradation of the human body, so instead a mega-corporation has stepped up to solve everyone's problems. When has that ever gone wrong? G&Co has managed to monopolize the organ replacement game, able to provide anyone who needs a new liver or lung with just that. These parts don't come cheap though, and G&Co isn't looking for one-and-done sales. Nah, they're gonna lease your essential pieces, and if you miss a payment, you're getting repoed. Yeah, they've got organ repo men in this world. Pretty bleak. Of course, this means that we're gonna see a whole lot of forced organ removals by dudes in dark suits in the dead of night, and it gets gory. When REPO first imposed itself upon the world, plenty of folks were unprepared for the nastiness of it all. Sure, it's a pretty gross and goofy concept, especially when it's done up in such a campy comic book style, but the gore is body horror on a whole other level. Squishy, sticky, slimy organs ripped from bodies like cherries from an overfilled pie. Yuck indeed. All of these impromptu, non-consensual surgeries are happening thanks to the unchecked greed and overwhelming power of those at the top of the society. Beneath all those rockin' tunes, special effects, and exaggerated characters is a cautionary tale relating to people's darkest fears. What if the folks with all the money just decided to squeeze us for what we're worth? What if they took it further than debt and indentured servitude? What if they came looking for the stuff that quite literally keeps us alive? I know it seems kind of silly to be making this point about a guts-filled body horror rock opera, but I don't think such a goofy movie makes a lasting cult impact without some sort of strong message underneath it all that resonates with people. Food for thought. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Possession of Michael King. I'm gonna kick this entry off by saying something that flies in the face of the point of this list. Plenty of people have requested this flick across multiple other videos. So in saying that not enough people talk about it, lots of people have been talking about it. Let's hear it for the fan favorite, The Possession of Michael King. You know, most possession movies have a certain type of person they like to have possessed, right? Often it starts with the little kid or maybe the woman in white. But in this mockumentary / found footage gem, we've got the skeptical dude getting taken over by demons. Uh-oh. The titular Michael King is a documentary filmmaker, and he has decided he wants to investigate the paranormal. He's quite the skeptic, loudly professing that he believes in basically nothing. No God, no devil, no other worldly forces whatsoever. Setting himself up for quite the fall now, isn't he? In order to prove his convictions and ensure that everyone knows just how smart and rational he is, Michael decides to make a documentary proving once and for all that there's no such thing as the supernatural. He hops online and posts an ad asking for experiments and rituals he can perform while being recorded to see if anything paranormal happens. After getting lots of responses, he's off to the races. He gets his cameraman to record everything he does in the hopes of capturing nothing. but we do have a movie, so he captured something. His original plan falls apart pretty quickly. After a few half-hearted attempts to summon something, Michael finds himself enacting an LSD-fueled ritual in the basement, which is surprisingly effective. He's now host to a demon, and the people in his life are going to suffer for it. Inexplicable noises fill his head, technology revolts against him, and terrible acts are carried out without his knowledge. The found footage style amplifies a lot of these scares as well. The Possession of Michael King is a pretty effective possession horror movie, but it seems to have fallen by the wayside. Critics didn't love it when it was first released, which might have something to do with its general lack of lasting impact now. But if any of the parts mentioned above sound interesting, then this is the underrated movie for you. Coming in at number 3, we've got Hell Night. Now for a real throwback, let's travel through time to 1981. Oh yeah, the good stuff. Quaaludes and Jack Daniels, baby. This is one radical flick. Everything you would expect from a cheesy slasher called Hell Night is here. We've got wild parties, frats and sororities, a supposedly haunted house, folks not taking any threat seriously, and more. And Linda Blair is in it. Folks just don't know how to have fun like this anymore. After a day of hard partying, a small group of pledges are brought to Garth Manor, the location of a supposed killing spree years before. But there's a caveat. One deformed child supposedly survived this fateful day and lurks in the darkness. And of course, when a bunch of college kids trespass on the property, he decides to deal with them. Overall, this is a wicked fun slasher with plenty of good moments. At the time of release, most folks just considered it another Halloween ripoff, but over time it has risen to the top among a bunch of other cult hit wannabes. It's always fun to find a hidden gem from past eras, and Hell Night is just such a jewel. Coming in at number 2, we've got Animal. On the surface, this is a pretty bog standard teen horror movie. You know the ones. A group of Hollywood attractive friends head out into the woods on a fun trip with plans to get drunk, get high, and get busy. The plot points are all there, and there doesn't seem to be anything to set this flick apart from a bunch of identical ones, but when the monster shows up, that's when it takes on a life of its own. The Animal is a low-budget legend. Giving off some crazy Wendigo vibes, but also making its own mythology, the creature that stalks the woods pulls off some absolutely brutal kills. And really, that's all you can ask for from a monster in a movie like this. No need for a tragic backstory or an allegory nodding in the direction of a bigger message, just a really scary apex predator ripping folks to shreds. And of course, there's the ending that implies there might be more where that came from. So simple, so effective. With some fun performances from Keke Palmer and Jeremy Sumpter too. Animal made its round on Netflix back around the time of its release, leading to a lot of folks seeing it and not necessarily taking it too seriously, but that is the joy of it. You'll get a whole lot more out of the experience if you go in knowing it's gonna be a less than perfect flick. Let the animal be what it's gonna be. And finally at number 1, we've got Daniel Isn't Real. Fight Club for horror-loving millennials. What a way to describe a movie, right? But if you boil it down to its most basic elements, that's essentially what Daniel Isn't Real turns out to be. And it's every bit as crazy as it sounds. Psychedelic visuals, insane ego trips, and dollhouses containing your evil, confident other self. What more could you ask for in a movie? Seriously, this one is a face melter, literally and metaphorically. Poor Luke. He experienced a whole lot of trauma early on in his life. To help cope with it all, he came up with another boy to play with, one much more confident and braggadocious than himself. This imaginary friend, Daniel, becomes all too real, however, and encourages young Luke to do some really dangerous stuff. To prevent this from causing further harm, his mom makes him stash Daniel away in an old dollhouse. This doesn't hold forever though, and Daniel comes back later in Luke's life with a vengeance. Luke is basically an empty shell of a person, letting whoever he's hanging out with dictate how he's gonna act. This lets him fit in essentially anywhere, but also starts causing him a whole lot of trouble. Daniel doesn't like being pushed away and really wants to take control of Luke's body. He knows best, of course. This sets off a series of events with major repercussions, and Luke's gotta figure out exactly what to do about it. It gets weird. A trip and a half, it's wild that folks don't talk about this one more. If only every movie got exactly the amount of love it deserved. Unfortunately, I don't know if we'll ever reach that kind of singularity. In the meantime, we can keep trying to boost the flicks that should have more influence and have a great time doing so. What'd you think of the list? Have you seen any of these? What's a criminally underrated horror movie you love? What's an overrated horror movie? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more caffeinated ones from the top 5 most disturbing scenes in horror movies. DC Carter says, Keegan, you may need to make a part 2, 3, and 4 to cover all the disturbing scenes in movies. You may be right, DC. Make sure to pop some in the comments and make sure they get covered. Lowlander 2004 says, lol, I seen Cannibal Holocaust at my auntie's when I was about 10. And what on earth were you doing watching that 1 decade into your life? Nordic Beast says, lol, I'm cooking while listening to this. Something vegetarian, I assume. Ella Rose says Keegan, bleak or wonderful enough that she took her own life. That's actually a pretty valid way to look at it. And Mary Anna Conti says torture porn is not my thing, and to be frank, I judge harshly those who love them. Just saying. I mean, some people express their worldview in violent and disturbing ways, but yeah, it's definitely not for everyone. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go take a little swim with the sharks. Hopefully my open wounds don't cause any issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Why can't I say this sentence without sounding like a robot? This sets off a series with why? Unfortunately, I don't know for In the meantime, we can keep trying to boost the flick so that DC Carter says Keegan, you me.